Hello, everyone. Welcome for joining us this evening. I'm Alyssa DeFilippo with Parents Helping Parents. I manage Connections California, which is an online resource and information hub statewide online resource and information hub for transition to adulthood and adult services. I thank you and I welcome you to Regional Center Housing and Living Supports The Basics. We're pleased to welcome back to the Connections California screen Michael Pinkerton, who was here in February presenting what I've learned from working with adults on the spectrum. Michael has been part of Integrated Community Services in Marin County for over 10 years. He's currently the Director of Living Skills at ICS, Integrated Community Services, and he has much experience supporting individuals as they make their way in the world. He finds it very satisfying to help people undertake these transitions and to see how much they grow from their endeavors, including taking that big step into independent living. Michael's a marriage and family therapist as well, working with individuals, couples, and families. He has a strong focus with work with individuals on the spectrum and their families. So thank you again for coming. I'm going to hand it over to Michael. And there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for being here for the presentation. I'm going to share my screen, and it just give me a second to get it into a slideshow mode. Okay, well, like Alyssa said, I'm going to be talking today primarily about supported living, which is the area in which I've worked for many years. And what we're going to cover in this presentation is I'll talk a little bit about myself, a brief background, and I'll also give a little background on Integrated Community Services, which is the agency here in San Rafael, California, that I have worked for since 2013. And then we'll get into just thinking about independence and what it means. I'm assuming most people here are parents and you have a child or children with disabilities, and you are looking at the future and what it means and how they can live their fullest and best lives. And so we're going to talk about landmarks of becoming independent, and then take a minute to talk about a concept, an important concept that we really focus on a lot at our work at ICS called dignity of risk. And then a little bit about risk analysis. I know as parents, a big concern is, risks and safety. Then I'll talk a little bit about the process for receiving residential supports, such as supported living services from the regional center. And then I will briefly talk about some of the different options that are out there that will be briefer because I've not worked with those options. But then I'll talk more in depth about group homes. Now, I've not worked in group homes, but I've worked with a lot of people that have moved from group homes to SLS, and I've worked with a lot of staff that worked in group homes. We'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about supported living and some of the different structuring of supported living programs that I've seen. Because what I would like from this presentation is for all of you to have a way of assessing and thinking about potential supported living situations and what are sort of the strengths and weaknesses of different setups. And I'll also give some advice on judging SLS agencies and their programs, which I think can be helpful when you're faced with trying to support your son or daughter and help them, find a place to live. And then, like Alyssa said, we'll have a Q&A. So I'm Michael Pinkerton. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm licensed in California and Idaho, and I reside in Idaho. I have been working with individuals and families as a therapist since 2018. About half or more of the people I work with at any given time are on the autism spectrum. I am the director also of living skills programs at Integrated Community Services in San Rafael, California. That's in Northern California, in the Bay Area. And I've been with Integrated Community Services since 2013. And I've worked with adults with developmental disabilities since 2008, so about 17 years now. Here's our website, Integrated Community Services. And there's on the presentation, there's a, our web address. Now, the services that we provide at ICS, we provide a variety of services supported by the regional center, and the regional center we work with is Golden Gate Regional Center. So we provide supported living services. We also provide independent living skills training. That's to people who still live at home with family. We provide tailored day services. And this is where we support people taking classes and other pre-vocational supports. And for that program, a lot of times those services can be provided remotely, and we do provide them through SDP plans in all of California. So anyone on an SDP plan anywhere in California that was interested in those services could contact me. We also have a new vendorization called Coordinated Family Supports. And then we do habilitation, which is long-term job coaching. We also work with the Department of Rehabilitation. We do work training, job coaching, and job development. And we also work with the county behavioral health system, providing mental health services and supports. And there we provide independent living skills and vocational supports. So, we do quite a range of things at ICS, which is something that I really enjoy about working here. And again, if you want to contact me about our services at ICS, you can reference the PDF that you receive after this, and my phone number and email address are there. Okay, well, when you think about your child and you think about the future, you want to think about how will my child become as independent as is possible so that they can live the fullest life possible with the most choices available to them. And I want everyone to just kind of do a little thought exercise and think about yourself and how and when did you become independent? What were the steps that were taken? How did it happen? So if you just think back, one milestone might have been your first trip to the mall without your parents, where you walked around maybe with friends, and your parents weren't there. Maybe they came and they picked you up several hours later. Your first job, where now you're out of the house and you're working, and really you're kind of moving outside of the bubble of your family, and you're earning money. Your first romantic relationship, of course, that's an important milestone for most people. And then paying your first bill as you make money and you start to become responsible for yourself. That's an important step. And going to college is a step for many people. And that may be the first time you really move out of your family home. If you go away to college, and then your first apartment. And that is really typically where you start to really become an adult, when you move into your first apartment. Now, what are some of the key features in these situations? Well, one is being on your own and outside of your family's bubble and your family's protection. Um, what's another feature? Well, it's building confidence with being out of that bubble in steps over many years. So the first time you go to the mall on your own, maybe you're 13 or 14, and you finally move out, maybe you're 24 or 25. So over that course of 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, you gradually were taking steps and increasing your confidence and your independence. Now, what are some other things about these situations? Well, you had the opportunity to engage in activities against your parents' wishes without them knowing about it. And that was important. Um, you also started to suffer the consequences of your decisions. And it wasn't your parents enforcing those consequences, but it was if you got in a relationship with someone who was not a good match, it didn't go well. You weren't happy. Maybe there was a bad breakup, and you suffered from that and you learned. Maybe you decided not to wake up for work one day and go in, and you ended up losing your job over it. All of these things were important in your development as a person, in your development towards adulthood. So actually facing real difficulties in a variety of realms in which you reap the benefits, but also suffered the consequences of your decisions and your behaviors. These are some of these key features. Now, if your child has a disability, there are supports out there that can help your child achieve some of these milestones. And this is geared towards people that get regional center supports. And the regional center has supports in life skills, like residential supports. They also have pre-vocational supports. These are things like day programs or tailored day services. And those supports can help with like volunteering support in maybe, college, community college courses, and other areas, sometimes developing hobbies into small businesses, things like that. And then also vocational supports like work training, job development, and job coaching. Now, in considering the future and thinking about independence, there's an important concept that we talk about a lot at ICS, and it's called the dignity of risk. And I'm a parent, and I know, I know that as parents, when our child is young, one of our primary jobs is to mitigate or reduce, and really we want to actually almost eliminate risk. Now, we usually realize there's no elimination of risk. Your child could trip and fall and hit their head in about a millisecond, and you can't stop it. But it is one of our jobs as parents is to mitigate risk, reduce risk. Right now, as our children get older, it's important that we start to understand and see that we can mitigate risk less and less each year. And our job shifts from this risk mitigation to preparing our child to take on the challenges and risks of life. Now, of course, things depend on, level of disability. This is very individualized, but it's very important that in as much as possible as a parent, I believe you benefit your child the most if you consider this and understand that preparing your child to take on the challenges and risks of life is, is an important part of parenting as your child gets older. And to take in the understanding that the risk of failure comes with the opportunity to learn and grow. And in fact, one cannot learn and grow without taking risks, which may result in failures, disappointments, and suffering. And I think as parents, we can feel like we have made a mistake when our child has a bad outcome of some kind. But to remember that stepping back and allowing your child, disability or not, to live their life and take risks is a gift. Now, another thing in my years of work, because I've done a lot of work where a young person is considering moving out, and they could be anywhere from, I've seen as young as 17 to, as old as like 40. Someone first moving out of their family home. And I've had many discussions with parents, about their concerns and their worries. And I think being able to realistically analyze risk is very important and can be very helpful. And, I know a lot of you may have younger children, and you can't really quite do this yet. But if you have children who are older, maybe teenagers or older, I really would recommend you go through the following questions in your mind, and you think about your disabled, right, son or daughter. Okay, so these are the questions. Do they drink or use drugs? Are they a risk taker or thrill seeker? Do they drive? Do they have friends or acquaintances who pressure them to engage in risky behavior? And the last question would be, are they routine oriented? Do they like routines? Do they like to do things sort of the same way, day after day? Now, in my experience working with, I at ICS, we have about 75 people who are living in apartments, who are clients of Golden Gate Regional Center. We work with a number of people living at home with their families, probably about 40 people. And then we do job coaching with a lot more people. And I've worked at another agency before this, and I probably worked with another 60 or so people. So I've observed a lot of people. And now, in my experience here, more often than not, the answers to these questions are they do not drink or use drugs. They are not risk takers or thrill seekers. Sometimes people have driver's license, but for the most part, people don't drive. They don't have friends or acquaintances who pressure them to engage in risky behavior. And a pretty good percentage of people are fairly routine oriented. Now, those answers mean that there is a lot less risk that's there in living independently. Now, what I want you to do after you do this is think of a few non-disabled 20-year-olds who are relatives or friends of the family. Just think of a number of different people and go through the same questions in your mind. Do they drink or use drugs? Are they risk takers or thrill seekers? Do they drive? Do they have friends or acquaintances who pressure them to engage in risky behavior? Are they routine oriented? And a lot of the time, you'll find the answers to those questions are yes, they drink. Sometimes they use drugs. Sometimes they're risk takers or thrill seekers. Most people drive. And many people have friends or acquaintances who pressure them to make bad choices and engage in risky behavior. And a lot of young people are not at all routine oriented. So who really is at bigger risk of getting injured or killed as they go out into the world and of being harmed. And I understand there's other risks that are important to consider that may be higher for individuals with disabilities. But this is an important process, I think, to go through and to just be realistic about things. Now, I would urge you as a parent to ask yourself some additional questions, such as, what were you doing when you first moved out of your house? What were your friends doing? And I would add the additional question, if your parents knew what you were doing and had the power to control and stop you, would that have been good or bad for your development? Um, you know, and these are just things to think about. And I think it can be eye-opening and helpful to consider these things as you're thinking about the future. Okay, so we're going to talk about this milestone, moving out. So what have I seen in 17 years in supported living services? Well, I think the first thing to talk about is to just give a brief overview of the regional center. Now, the process with the regional center can be confusing sometimes, and it may be hard to find someone to explain things, but I'm going to speak about the general process that I'm familiar with for getting into like a new living situation, moving out of the family home. So first, the important thing is that, your son or daughter is qualified for regional center services. And then a service like SLS is available upon moving out of the family home. So the first thing would be to request from the regional center social worker to visit some residential programs. You're talking to your son or daughter, you're saying, hey, we should visit some places, see where you want to live, what you want to do. And then, there's reaching out to the social worker, and starting that conversation. And, I would, urge you to consider having your child have that contact, have that conversation, or you do it together. Then from the social worker, you should get some exposure to some programs. You could do your own research, see what programs work with the regional center. And you visit different programs, and you want your child to feel like they find a program that is a good fit. And you help them, you look at what you feel like looks good, and you come to an agreement that, okay, well, we're interested in these couple of programs. And then usually you would make the case for the program to the IPP team, which usually consists of the social worker, the person who's getting the service. So that would be like your child. And then usually, if you as parents are involved, you would be there too. That would be sort of the IPP team. And you would just discuss things and get general agreement. Okay, these programs are appropriate, and that the regional center can fund them. And then you typically would then be waiting for an opening, for an apartment to open up. And then an apartment opens, you pay a visit to that apartment. Your child goes there, looks at who else is living there, looks at the setup, and then decides on a case-by-case basis, like, this looks good, I'd like to move here. Oh, here, I don't like so much. And then you move forward. Now, it's also possible that if you are renting or buying a home, you can go that route, and you can just set up with the regional center, say, we're going to be renting an apartment. And then you would just be looking at agencies, which agency could provide the supports in the apartment. So that's another way that people do it sometimes. Now, I've noticed a lot of parents, they're coming out of the school system, and they are used to dealing with the school, maybe the school administration, teachers, possibly like the uh, on a board of education, but basically they're used to working within the education system. Well, it's important to remember that the regional centers, they pay for lifelong services to individuals with qualifying disabilities. So once you're in the regional center, you are qualified for lifelong services. And unlike the schools, the regional centers are set up to coordinate the services and then fund them. That's their primary role. I mean, that is their role. So typically, it's a less contentious relationship. And most often, you don't need to fight as much for services. And it's good to remember that. Now, that's been my experience, especially with Golden Gate Regional Center. I don't know that that goes for all regional centers. But the fact is they're there to set up the services and then to fund them. Now, they do have some procedural rules which can impact flexibility around supports. Sometimes you can't be in this program and that program, or there's just some different rules. So the social worker will explain those. The other thing to remember is the regional center does not provide services. They pay others to do so. And sometimes there are not enough agencies to provide a certain service. And so that can limit options too. So, if the idea is you want a particular type of supported living situation, but only one agency provides it, it might be hard to find openings there if that's the case. And the regional center can't control that. They can't control, how many vendors they have, how many companies provide the services. Now, something else I've come across quite a lot is people that have worked with the regional center just being a bit confused between the regional center social worker, the agency, the manager. There can be some confusion on the structure. So that's why I put this slide in. So, the basic structure is that the regional center agrees to a plan of supports. And this is often called an ISP, or individual service plan. So that would be a plan that says, we are going to help. We are going to help with banking and budgeting. We're going to help with cooking. So it just sets up the areas of support and the amount of hours of support that are going to be provided. And it's typically created by the person who's going to receive the services. So your child will be involved in creating the plan. You as family members could be involved in creating the plan. And the company or vendor that's going to provide the service, like ICS, or, there's many companies that do the service, they write the plan as well, what's going to be provided. And typically they'll write the draft of the plan with input. So this plan with an amount of hours and amount of support then gets agreed to by the regional center. They agree to the plan. Then the company, like ICS, provides the service through their staff. And typically the general name of the term for the position is a direct support professional, DSPs. Those are the individuals that are working for the company and providing the support. And the regional center pays for the services, and they're there to renew the funding each year and support you if there are complaints or concerns or a need for new services. But really, once you're set up with an agency, most of your interactions and all of your support comes through that agency providing the service. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about living options. Now, so some of the options that are available are something called a family home agency. Then there are college living experience programs. They also call them CLE programs. There are group homes, and there are supported living services. Now, and there may be others. These are the four that I'm aware of. Now, I'm not going to talk about this setup, family home agency. I actually don't know anyone that's worked in a family home agency, and I don't know any people who've lived in this setting and then come over to work with ICS. Nevertheless, it is an option, and so I left it in here. And so if you're looking through the slides and you're interested in this, there's a basic summary, and you can ask your regional center social worker about it if you feel like this would be a good fit. Now, a second option, and this isn't long-term, but this is short-term because it's a college living experience. So, I think it lasts about as long as college potentially. These CLE programs are increasingly popular in my experience. And again, I've not worked in one of these and I'm not familiar, but I have worked with many people who went off to a CLE program or returned from a CLE program. And they're definitely worth looking into. They seem like they can be really excellent programs, and they give like a college living type of experience to people. So definitely something worth I think researching and then looking into if it would be a good fit. Now, another living situation is a group home. And group homes were very prevalent before supported living, kind of came into the picture. And I've not worked in a group home, but I've worked with many staff who have worked in group homes, and I've worked with many, many people that were living in group homes and then moved into supported living, and occasionally people that were in supported living and moved into group homes. So I will speak more in depth about group homes. So a group home most typically is like a 6-bed home in a minimum of 3 bedrooms. So there'd usually be 6 people living in the home in 3 bedrooms. And the agency owns the home. And that is important to be aware of. So the agency owns the home, and the home is licensed by the state. They also call them like community care facilities. And in a licensed home, staff are present all the time, and there are a variety of rules to be followed. Typically, residents have no access to medications. Those are held by staff. Residents have no or limited access to money. Often that's also held by staff. Residents often do not have access to the kitchen, except when supervised. And it's typically the case, I believe, that residents cannot be in the home alone. Group homes work on kind of a level system, and the level determines some of the rules, the types of supports, and their ratio. And the ratio is the number of staff to the number of residents, such as there has to be 1 staff for every 2 residents or 1 staff for every 3 residents. Again, it's not my area of expertise here, but the group homes do have different levels. So, if your child had major behavioral issues that were very difficult to deal with and needed a very high level of supervision within the group home system, that could be matched. That could work. So this slide is there. We're not going to go over all this, but this slide is there just for your awareness. Now, group homes have, so we're going to do this kind of with each thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as the upside and the potential downside of each situation. So the potential upside in a group home setting is that often the home feels like a community, for example, and often meals are taken together. The whole group will go on certain like outings and places. There is a chance to work on cooking and other living skills, often like once or twice per week if the home is set up well. And in a home like this, safety and security are paramount. You know, and the homes are licensed, then there's a lot of oversight. They, they also, it can be an upside that there's not free access to medications if a person, might be really irresponsible with medications or make mistakes. There's also not free access to food, which sometimes can be important. It's not the person's home; it's owned by the agency. They're also an upside is that they are affordable. Usually, a person's Social Security payment pays for room and board, and then the regional center pays for like the supervision part. Now, the complaints that I've heard from people coming out of group homes typically center around they had to live with a bunch of people that they don't necessarily like. They had to share a bedroom with someone. That was probably the biggest complaint people have had. Then also, like this kind of rule of not being allowed in the home when staff are not present is difficult. People would complain because everyone would be going out to Costco or going somewhere, and they would basically have to leave the house, and just kind of walk around the community or go somewhere else. And there's really no chance for like independence around finances or medications. Okay, well, now I'm going to talk about supported living situations. And supported living is very flexible, and there are a variety of potential living situations with varying amounts of staffing support. So there are like up to 24/7 supported living where there's always a staff around to be there to support and to provide supervision or help, all the way down to a situation in which someone comes once a week to just check in on things and offer support, offer help, maybe once a week. The person meets with staff and they go out and maybe do some grocery shopping or do some budgeting, or there's some questions that have come up, or there's help filling out forms. So it can be all the way from 24/7 to just a very small amount of weekly or monthly support, very minimal. And I've worked in like settings and supervised settings across the full range from 24/7 to very minimal supports. And just a comment about this. I think in the school system, I think there can be a feeling that, like my child is not getting the resources available. I must work to get as much as possible, as many possible resources. And now, when you're looking at trying to become an adult and become a responsible adult, it's less can be more. So there's really a trade-off between the more you have staff and the more staff are around. Often the slower is a movement towards, becoming more independent in different areas. And so that's just an important thing to have in your mind. So I've worked and supervised a number of homes, and this can be a home like a condominium or a 1, 2, or 3 bedroom apartment. So in these settings, so a lot of these things are going to be the case in all supported living situations. So always in supported living, the individual rents or owns the home. It does not belong to the agency providing the service. They do not own it. They are not the property managers. That's most typically the situation. Now, and usually there's going to be a manager that oversees a number of these supported living situations. So when there's 24/7 support, there has to be a number of staff people. So, and usually the shifts are long, and there's a rotation. So maybe you have, I don't know, 5 to 7 staff people over the course of the week. Shifts might consistently be 8 hours. Sometimes they might be 12-hour shifts. So shifts are long. And remember, in all supported living situations also, and really all residential supports from the regional center, there's going to be an individual service plan that's going to lay out, this is the support this individual is supposed to get. This is the number of hours of support. This is the type of support, et cetera. And there's usually would be an understanding or specification like, is it safe for this person to be alone? Maybe for how long, those things also may be a part of the plan. So, when looking at a situation like this with this much staffing, some of the potential upside is that, safety. There's, always a staff person present that can be there to supervise, to help, et cetera. Now, compared to a group home, there is some flexibility, like individuals can have a plan that allows for, being alone in the house. It's not like a group home where typically you can't be alone in the house. You can have individualization around meals. That's possible. I've worked in a lot of homes where people have different diets. They have their own food. They get support to cook meals. So theoretically, there can be a lot of individualization. People may have a choice in housemates in these settings. It depends. But I've seen settings where you have people who come and visit for the room. And, if there's 3 housemates in one open room, the 3 housemates vote and they talk about who they would like to have come in. So there can be choice sometimes in housemates. And typically individuals have their own bedroom. That's like probably one of the most important things that people really liked and preferred about these settings. Now, a potential downside about having this much staff around is staff are always present. And in that setting, it can be difficult for individuals to apply and develop skills, especially like taking responsibility, for things. It's often staff is like relied upon and over relied upon. Also, with long shifts, when people come and they're in the house for 8 hours, individualization can be difficult. The staff's working a long shift with like 2 to 4 people. I personally don't think it's an ideal model. For that reason, often staff lose motivation on long shifts. And also I've observed many times the house may appear that it belongs to the staff, not the individuals living in the house. And that's really, not how it should be. Now, remember, the amount of SLS support can vary greatly between all the time and less. So I've worked in houses where there's an overnight person that's there, and from, in the evening from 6 to 10, there's also a staff, but from 3 to 6 p.m., there's no staff. And in these types of situations, again, there's still a lot of support, but there is a built-in allowance for time alone. And, often for most people, that's really positive. And again, but this is still a pretty high staff presence. And sometimes there can be less ownership, over home and over responsibilities. Another common situation is a home where you have a few people living in the home, and you have a staff person come in every day for a couple of hours. Um, and that's like that situation. Again, you have someone who's coming by daily, seeing how things are going. And there's a lot of unsupervised time. And this, shows confidence and is a good way to build independence. Also, in my experience, the shorter shifts, the less time a staff is scheduled to come in and be there, the more their work is focused, and the more effective it can be. So if someone just comes in for a couple of hours, then they can really focus on doing some meal prep or helping to go grocery shopping, teaching cooking, teaching budgeting skills. I think that's a real benefit there. It does create a situation. There's no overnight staff, where there's, some risk. So in general, there's going to be increased risk there. Another situation that I've managed, which is a pretty, can be quite a good situation, is like an apartment group living situation. So in this situation, you have an apartment complex. And in this complex, an agency has a number of people who live in the complex. And maybe it's a unit that has 25 people, and maybe there's 4 to 10 people that the agency works with that are living there. And in this situation, you can have a staff person who's in the complex, but not in people's homes, but they're in the complex and they just stop by, they visit people, they knock on doors and they're like, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? They check in if there are any issues. And then kind of each day, they may have a different person that they help with medical appointments, grocery shopping, et cetera. And this is a nice situation because it can build some community, and really people's apartments are their own, which is great. And now also, and this is what we have sort of most often at ICS, though we do have a number of people that are in a 24/7 type of support situation. Most people we work with are met with 1, 2, or 3 times per week. They're in their own apartment. Most people live by themselves. Some people with housemates, or some people are married or in a relationship. And we come by 1 to 3 days a week, usually for 2 to 3 hours per time. And there's a lot of upside to a situation like this. There's a lot of freedom to live an adult life. There's a lot of ownership of the living situation. As staff are there only a small fraction of the time. There's a lot of individualization in terms of working on goals. And the support can really be around key areas like grocery shopping, budgeting, medical appointments. So it can be a very good situation. Now, the potential downside is, people are in the community without staff most of the time, every day and overnight. And, most of the time, this works really well. Now, if a person tends to find trouble, this situation might not work well, because there's a lot less supervision and staff, and it can be easier for individuals, to hide things. But a lot of situations can be managed. Now I put in a slide about IHSS. I'm not going to cover this, but it does come up, and it's a county service. So for those of you that get the slide deck, if you want some basic information about IHSS, you can You can look at this slide. Well, lastly, I just wanted to give some tips on picking providers. So I think there's some general principles you should follow when kind of evaluating an agency. So first off, if you're visiting apartments or homes, the cleanliness and the feel of the homes that you visit is one important measure of the professionalism and the approach of the agency. Now, it's someone's home, so they may be messy, and the agency really can't control that. But just in the agency's ability to plan, they're going to set you up and bring you into a home, and they're going to talk to the person living in the home, and so the person makes the home nice for the visit. So the cleanliness and the feel and how welcoming they are, I think, is an important thing to look at. Now, the qualities of the organization as a whole, right? Like what their office is like, what their website is like, what maybe you talk to some higher up people in leadership, what they're telling you, this will impact like your communication with them, sort of how heard you feel, and kind of the general framework or philosophy within which services are provided. So that's important, right? Now, usually, as you visit programs, you're going to deal with the program managers, might be the ones that are giving you tours, or supervisors. Now, who those managers are, their qualities will be very important on how responsive the agency is and how thoroughly they respond when issues come up. Okay. But the thing to remember is that it's the qualities of the staff, also called like DSPs, direct support professionals, or at ICS, we call them independent living skills trainers or SLS instructors. Those staff who directly work with individuals will be most important to your like child's life and most critical to their experience. They provide the service. So that is really, in my opinion, the most important thing to evaluate. And those aren't going to be the people that are talking to you the most typically. Those are going to be the people that if you visit a home that you observe, and you observe their interactions with the people that they work with and how they act in the home. So some things that I would observe is, how do the staff interact with the residents? How do they treat you? I would advise you to always, speak with the residents. How do you like living here? Ask them questions, speak to their families if you get that opportunity. A lot of agencies are willing to provide that contact information. Just be observant. Are staff on their phones at all? And if so, like for what reason? Are they talking about work? Are they playing games? Are they talking to their friends? Does the home, I would really look at this. Does the home appear to belong to the residents or to the staff? That is important as well. And do the residents participate in activities of daily living, such as cooking, cleaning, etc., to the best of their abilities? I think these are all things, that you really do want to observe. And remember, supports can change over time. Often when people start out, they have more supports, and then over time, those supports can be lessened as a person gets experience in the world and becomes, increasingly more independent. So don't have like a static view of things. Yeah, so this is just about starting off with more support and then moving towards less support. And as a parent, I think it's helpful to talk to your child about this a lot and have a plan. And I would recommend, working with someone that you can really talk to, and have 1 or 2 meetings where you really think about and plan things out. And I just have a few other helpful tips there. Well, just to summarize, moving out is a big step, and really think about how to evaluate providers, understand the options, and remember that as safety increases, if you're really wanting to prioritize safety, freedom and personal growth often decrease, and as support increases, also motivation often decreases. Naturally, safety is often more important initially, and less staffing when possible is always important for growth in the long run. All right, well, thank you, and I will stop sharing and answer questions.
Well, thank you, Michael. The the clock on the screen says 7:30, but if everybody wants to stick around, we can see if we can tackle some of the questions. I think everybody got a lot more than we bargained for. I think there was some very valuable information in that presentation beyond housing supports and supported living services with the regional center. So thank you for that, Michael. I just want to direct people's attention to the chat. I have put in the links to the evaluation, one in English, one in Spanish. And if you could please fill them out for short questions, that really helps us. So just to start it off, who actually decides the number of hours assigned to a person who needs services? I think you covered this. And as an adjunct to that, if there's 24-hour service involved, do the people sleep overnight? Are they awake? And where does IHSS fit into all that?
Well, so usually, and all my work here is with, 98% is with Golden Gate Regional Center. Occasionally, I've worked with other regional centers when people have moved from other areas, and the other regional center is still responsible for a period of time. But typically, what you have is you have a process of plan development, and that the agency typically, like, so if you think, oh boy, for example, with ICS, wow, we'd like to work with ICS. So a first step is that ICS would do an assessment, talk about skills, and then create a plan. And we might feel like, okay, we think this much support is good. And then family might think, wow, well, we think this much support will be good. And this is all discussed. And you try to land on a place that makes sense, and you bring it to the regional center. We're thinking this much support. And then the regional center has to approve the amount of support. Now, in supported living, typically when there's a high level of support, and even if there's not, there's a request to do an IHSS assessment, which is from the county. And what IHSS is assessing for is the need, like, for example, if you're on Canadian crutches, right, those crutches that go in your arms, and you have CP, you probably cannot mop. You just can't mop. You will never be able to mop, it's likely, right? And so that's a kind of service that IHSS will, in-home support services, the way that service works is they're going to come in and they are going to do for you a task that you cannot do. That is the idea. It's not about teaching. It's not about learning. It's not about participating. It's about, you cannot do these things, you'll get that help. So what typically happens in a high, like 24/7 kind of, oh, this person's going to need a lot of support, IHSS does that assessment. And then some of the hours of support are provided through IHSS. And most agencies will absorb that, and they'll provide both the regular support and the IHSS hours. They'll just get paid differently for the IHSS support. That's often how it works. Yeah, but you could need less support and you could get IHSS too for certain things, and that could be a separate person that comes. I hope, did I answer each part of that question? I'm not sure that I did.
Just about the supports overnight. If it's decided that they need 24-hour supports, do they sleep? Do they stay awake?
Well, so it's very individualized. So it depends on the plan. So if a person needs certain things to be done in the night, then the staff would have to wake up to do those things. So they wouldn't be sleeping. If the person needs to stay up all night, then it would be what's called an awake overnight. Most of the overnights that I've worked with, the staff could sleep. They had to wake up if there was an emergency. And the reason for the overnights was that the feeling was that if an emergency happened, the people in the home would not be able to deal with it. And that was why the overnight support was there. Um, but I personally think that oftentimes that it's not needed personally. I think, I mean, if someone, that's not all the time, it's very individualized, but that's just my feeling.
And it's in the plan.
Yes. And it's in,
Yes.
yes. And it's in the
And
plan.
I think you'd probably agree that to get any of these services, somebody should just ask their service coordinator at their regional center. And there are
Correct.
21 regional centers, and we're fond of saying there are 22 different ways of doing things at these 21 regional centers. So, always best to ask the questions of your service coordinator. And I think that you've given everybody a lot of food for thought and what questions to ask. But just, are we okay with a couple of more questions?
Sure.
Everybody with
Yeah.
Michael? Okay. How about what staff actually does? Do they help manage money and finances? Do they take individuals to evening activities, like social activities, if they want to go do karaoke or they want to go play, or see a movie or something?
So
Stuff like that.
everything is determined by the plan. So the plan could have a social goal, and the social goal could say in it that part of it is to get support going out in the community, doing certain things, and it will have a certain number of hours attached to it. And so, yes, there can be support for all of those things. And at ICS, what we try and do is we try and determine, like, okay, so for example, we set up recently, got some tickets for a baseball game. And we got a whole bunch of tickets and we offered, hey, hey, you can come to this game if you want. And people purchased those tickets. And then our staff just asked, okay, well, can you get to the meeting spot? And then we'll take the ferry, And the way we look at things is we try to determine, okay, you want to help to go to karaoke. Okay. Well, do you want to go with friends? Like, what are you doing independently? Maybe it's just helping you plan your trip to the karaoke place. We don't actually need to go with you. Or it could be like, okay, the way this plan is set up, you want to go to karaoke? Of course, we would go with you because, when you're out in the community, you have someone with you. And that's really, that's critical and that's important. So it's very dependent on the plan, but anything for independent living can be written into a plan for support typically.
So that would include, like you said, mopping for a person on Canadian crutches or going to the doctor if you need some support with going to a doctor. Yes, if that's written into the plan.
Yep. So we have situations where we help people with budgeting. We help them with, paying their bills, writing those checks, checking in. We know the rent is due this day. We check, hey, did you send out your rent check? Have you paid it? We should do it now. That type of support. Sometimes families will continue to help. They'll help with the finances, and we're not a part of that. It's nothing set in stone. It's really what is the support needed, and that's what's in the plan. Now, in supported living, you don't do like medication distribution. So you don't hold the medication. Here's your medication. Unless if you have a nurse, and some programs might have like a designated nurse or something like that. I don't think that's very common. Typically, what you do is you say, "Hey, you got to fill your med box today. Let's get out your medications," and then you support the person through doing that process.
Yeah, and I think that depends on the level of home support that the person is in and what their level of care is. And actually, in December, we're going to be having specific housing events for excuse me, more high needs, for lack of a better word, high need
Yeah.
supports. And this is not what this is tonight, but there will be that, and we'll talk about things like medication and stuff.
Mhm.
Some questions about visiting. Can people just drop in and visit at a group home or in an SLS situation if they want to visit their kiddos who are now adults and might not want you dropping in for a visit?
Well, with a group home, that such a thing probably has to be coordinated with the home. But in supported living, I mean, it's the same as just think of your 25-year-old kid in an apartment, and
Do you want to just
if
be
your
dropping in?
relationship is such that you just come over and drop by, then that's what you would do. There might be a staff person there, depending on the level of support there. But the home it's not the agency's home. It's not the staff's home. It's the person's home. So whatever, if they want to invite and have a friend over, they invite and have a friend over. If they want to have family over, I mean, it might be a courtesy if staff's always there to let them know. Maybe the staff just leaves during that period of time for the visit.
That's an important distinction between SLS and a group home.
Yes.
Is maybe less supports that the parent might want in an SLS situation, but that doesn't necessarily mean less supports, because you write supports that are needed into the plan. And you want to remember the independent factor that Michael went through with all that risk. What do you call it? Structured risk? No, that's what I called it.
Dignity of risk.
Dignity of risk, which I found very interesting. So thanks for that. Maybe we'll just take one more question, and that is,
Okay.
Is it possible to have supported living services when the client is living in a parent's home or an ADU on the family property? So two separate things. If they're in an ADU, it might be separate, but an ADU might also be within the confines of the house. So where does SLS split?
So my understanding and how these situations are treated here with Golden Gate Regional Center is, if you are in the house or on the family's property, you receive a different code, and it's called ILS, Independent Living Skills Training. Now, at ICS, we provide that. The thing about independent living skills training is usually there's an understanding that the family is sort of providing the basic support and supervision, whatever that is. And so there's a limit on the amount of hours you can get. And usually in ILS, it's 25 hours a month. So that's about 6 hours a week. And, that support is usually like, learning skills. You're developing independent living skills usually with that program. So there is support available, but typically, it's not to the level of SLS. If it's in this auxiliary dwelling unit situation, I could imagine regional centers sometimes being flexible with maybe saying it could be supported living. I don't know. So I would certainly ask, if a person needed a lot more support than the 25 hours. But normally, you would just do that through an ILS service.
And some folks are asking for your email, and I believe that's in the presentation we'll be sending them. Yes?
Yeah, if you take the slides, I mean, I'm happy to put it in the chat. Now, it depends if you have questions about services, then my email, which I'm adding to the chat, there, but it is on the slides. That's my email at Integrated Community Services. If you're interested in like consulting, thinking about the future, and thinking about these concepts of like what level of risk might be reasonable, and understanding that and thinking about those types of things, that would be more something that I cover in my like family therapy practice. And for that, you could call me. My number is on the early slide. That's about me. And that is my email for that.
Okay,
so
wonderful.
Just a little distinction there. But if
Yes.
you contact me either way, I can sort of steer you in what would be the appropriate direction.
Okay, and then I know I lied, but I do want to get to this question, and I forgot that I wanted to. but just, really hard to find good staff these days, Michael. Are you having the same problem at ICS? And would you agree with
Um,
that assessment?
we're having actually a good period right now. We've definitely had some very difficult periods where it was hard to find good staff. But we're going through like quite a good period right now. I mean, things come and go. It's hard to pay. It can be hard to pay people enough sometimes because we have a rate from the regional center. It doesn't like go up every year for cost of living and stuff like that. Um, so that can be difficult. And it looks like, um, yeah, I don't know. I was just seeing a couple other questions because I went into the chat, say a few
Oh
things.
boy, yeah, the chat's a dangerous place. You don't want to go in there.
But someone asked about self-determination plans, and I
Mhm.
mean, self-determination plan is you can purchase the same services as if you're not in an SDP plan. So that I shouldn't be a barrier, though. I guess an agency technically could say we're not going to accept the SDP because
Correct.
it is a little more difficult to take payments. I mean, we see it; it's a whole different billing process and everything. But at ICS we take
Correct.
any
An
SDP
agency
plan.
has, they within their rights. If they're vended with the regional center and they do not want to take on a self-determination program client, they're within their rights to say, no, I have not heard of
Yes.
any who have done that personally, but. All right, it is 7:46. We have
Okay.
extended 15 minutes beyond the fact that I'm proud that we always end at 7:30. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions. Time is well spent with Michael. Any kind of consultation fee he might provide for helping you prepare some kind of a plan, I would say it would be well worth it. But thank you, Michael, for coming. As always, you did two things for us this semester, and we couldn't be more grateful. Thank you, Beatrice. As always, we're sorry if I talk fast. Michael doesn't talk fast, so he's a good one to have on for Spanish interpretation because he's very measured in his speaking. So thank you for that, and thank you all for coming. And I've put the the calendar link. We do have a few more things for May, which is Regional Center Month coming up, and then we'll be off for the summer and back in September. So thanks everybody again for coming. Any last words, Michael?
Oh, well, just thanks so much, Alyssa, for having me, and thank you, Beatrice, for translating, and just yeah, appreciate everyone coming, and just like Alyssa said, if you want to know something, just ask your social worker or coordinator at the regional center. That is what they're there for.
Right. Questions are never silly. Okay. Thanks a lot. See everybody next week. Bye-bye.